Welcome to the third episode of the SheSight podcast, dedicated to showcasing the exceptional achievements of the women around us. As SheSight's motto goes, stories of her, by her, for everyone. Today we will delve into the transformative power of the women's voices that actually we come in contact with on an everyday life, but somehow still go unnoticed, and the critical importance of acknowledging their perspective in areas of social impact and research. I'm honored to be joined by a trailblazer in the same field. Welcome, Isha.
Thank you. Although I don't know if I would say that, but thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. So, Isha has dedicated her life and she's been her advocate for social impact and research all of these years. Her journey embodies the spirit that we follow at SheSight, where women's voices are celebrated and empowered to create meaningful change. And we're really grateful that she is here with us today.
Thank you, Disha. No, the pleasure is all mine, and I'm actually really honored to be here because I don't know, maybe we should for the audience tell them that how I know you.
Definitely.
And it's because Disha was a part of the cohort that I was mentoring on this really incredible program on advocacy and using art as an expression for advocacy. And if you know Disha at all, which I hope the audience gets the pleasure to eventually, that she really shines in this cohort, and she was so incredible, so fierce, and so her views were always, there was something to learn from. So I think to be here where she's doing something of her own and she's having these conversations and, really setting the narrative on the right path is actually, the pleasure is really all mine. So I'm really glad to be here and thank you for having me.
No, but really, even when, as you said, we were together in the cohort as well.
Yeah.
There's so many things I've learned from you, and even when we started the whole thing, I was one thing I was really looking forward to was the Sunday sessions that we used to have with you.
Yeah.
That was always a pleasure, and so was this.
Yeah.
It's all our pleasure. So let's delve right into the journey. We'll get into a little bit of, why don't you actually tell the audience about a little bit about what you do and, how you started doing all of that?
Sure. So maybe I can tell you a little bit about what I do at the moment. And so I'm Isha. I'm part of the social impact development space in the sector. I've been in the sector for more than 4 years now across India and Canada, which is where I did my master's. So I did my master's in 2019 in philosophy, specifically focusing on feminist and political philosophy, and was really involved in research specifically on gender-focused areas, which I think we'll talk about eventually.
Sure.
But I moved back from Canada to India because that was always the hope. I always wanted to move back and work in this sector and, take all the know-how that I experienced and all the opportunities that I got to learn from, different cultural experiences. And sort of use that in this country, which is, a mihrab of culture and diversity. And so I've been in the development sector since. I moved from doing very specific gender-focused research to education because that was kind of my core focus area, because when I was doing my master's, I was also teaching as a part of my master's. So I was a teaching assistant in philosophy. So I did a lot of courses. Yeah, that was really awesome. And I think that's something that I hope to go back to. But I was teaching for those 2 years and I realized that, all the work that I had done so far had been quite on the front lines, had been doing research and, a lot of secondary sort of research and not so much on-ground interaction with children or with, I would like to say, people who have aspirations for a future.
Definitely, yeah.
And so when I was doing all of that, I think that's when I realized that I think education and empowering children with the kind of tools that they need to make the kind of change that we need as a society is really the long game, achieving equality and justice and all these values that I know we want in the future, right? So I think when I moved back, I started working within the education space. So again, not education as in core school education, but education like experiential education that is helping students tap into these various interests and skill sets that they have, which is including art and, research, taking a lot of leadership, and how do you channel those specific skill sets, those motivations and impulses that I think in my experience, and you speak to anyone who works in education's experience, every kid has. So how do you really work with them and create education systems and curriculum, pedagogy around that, so that kids going in the future are making better decisions, not just for who they are, but for the world and for their community. And happy to talk more about that. But yeah, so now I moved from education, and now I sort of work within this larger social development space in terms of ecosystem strengthening. And what that means is that I work with philanthropists who want to give in the social sector and who want to make investments that create positive outcomes for the future, right? Because ultimately the idea in India is that, over the last few years, wealth has really accumulated.
Yeah, definitely.
And, India is such a hub of startup, incubation and startup culture that we've seen so many founders and so many new high net worth individuals who are young, who are passionate, who want to invest in the social sector for a better world, who recognize that doing business is a responsibility that you have not just to people who are direct beneficiaries of your business, but also to the society, because you're such a big entity that has the agency of all the combined individuals working together. So now we work with philanthropists on helping them invest in the social sector, where what are the causes that are underrepresented, what are the beneficiaries that are underserved, and where do you support, and how do you sort of strategically channel and funnel funding? Because in my experience of having worked in this sector, there is no dearth of good work. India has the most vibrant, incredible, solution-oriented development sector that I have come across. It is really, there are so many solutions that are being created to address specific social challenges, and it is not easy to address social challenges in this country because of how diverse and intersecting our different identities are, and how they become salient in different everyday experiences. Like, for example, as a woman, I definitely have trouble accessing public spaces similar to maybe men. But as a woman with, sort of class privilege that I might have and caste privilege that I have, there are some spaces and opportunities that come much easier to me, right? So in that sense, my identity as a woman is not as salient as maybe my class or caste identity. So, right, our identities become salient in multiple different ways. So doing good work in this sector really requires a lot of work. And I think funding is one of the biggest challenges that the sector faces. So channeling that funding so that the wealth grows proportionate to how wealth is being distributed. So that ultimately we all work ourselves out of a job. And by that, what I mean is that the social sector should not exist in an ideal future, right? In an ideal future, equality exists. And so that's where we all want to work towards, and in our lifetimes hopefully be able to see that. So that's a little bit about maybe a very long route to where I am and what I do, but yeah, that's what I sort of do now.
That's incredibly inspiring. I think, when you spoke about being a woman, and also speaking about how we have a lot of privileges that are also, some of them are alien to us, but some of them we've always grown up with, so we know what they are. Also, one thing that I didn't notice from our discussion was that maybe in the social impact sector, because you have people which are working for social impact, it might, the gender gap and all that might be comparatively less to areas like STEM. For example, we hear a lot of stories about, man and women in STEM and all of that. But possibly maybe it's just because, the men itself, they're working for social causes. So maybe more aware and even more responsible towards that. Correct. Which is a good thing. I think that should definitely be there.
It's a great thing, and it's not that just because they're men they won't have these kind of equal views. That's not the case at all. Equality is not a concept that can only be accessed if you're discriminated against. It is something that we all inherently value. We all inherently in a group will notice if someone is being treated a different way. And we will be cognizant of that. So it's because these people have been educated and by educated, I don't mean formal education necessarily, but have been conditioned, have been exposed to ideas around equality, which is what a lot of my work in the past was focused on, creating that for young men and young girls who are still developing and who are open-minded and aren't, closed off to a particular way of thinking.
Because it starts from right there,
starts from right there. Yeah, so that has been, my experience. And there are more people who are much more cognizant of these power dynamics in the social sector, but there is still always room for improvement.
Definitely. Very interesting. So, you spoke a lot about different characteristics like nurturing, caring. So maybe I have a little bit of a personal thing that I wanted to ask you. So personal life more so, would you say that, you prefer an approach towards success with perseverance and more towards the resilient side? Or would you say you're someone that believes more in passion and ambition? Because that also then shows in your professional side as well.
I think passion and ambition are always a crucial part of working in this sector
Mhm.
because, and I mean, in all sectors, but I would say purpose, I think, is the bigger piece in this
Interesting.
sector because we're all, here because we care for a particular outcome or for a particular purpose, whatever that may be in the social development space. But we care for the betterment of
Right,
something, right? So
right.
there is a purpose that really drives everybody here, especially people who, give, and I have noticed a lot of people giving up their corporate jobs, which, paid them maybe 10 times more than what they can ever hope to achieve in this sector. But I hear, so I'm sure passion and ambition in the way, in a purpose context, play a big role and are an everyday motivator. Not an everyday, but a big part of you to be like, okay, this is the long game. I'm playing a long game, it's not instant victory, it's not impact today. That I launch a program and tomorrow everything is better. So that's not, I think the role of passion and ambition is to make sure that you're in touch with some of these things that you feel like a drive towards, So it's important. But what gets you through every day is resilience and perseverance. And I think I've been in the sector for some time. I was in academia. So I've been in different places across the social sector. I was in academia. I was on the front line doing some grassroots work with NGOs and NPOs and volunteer work with NGOs and NPOs and organizing. And then I've done work in terms of consulting, social impact consulting and advisory, work in programmatic intervention. So I've been in different places. I think what gets you through every day is really perseverance and resilience because, like I said, you design a program, you launch it, and you're like, with this program, these many children are going to benefit from, education, for example, or whatever it is that you're designing. You are not going to see the impact of that overnight. True. Especially working in education or even philanthropy, which is where I work. Money moves really slowly, and once the money moves, once it's been sort of implemented, impact is like a 10-year, 15-year. With education, at least 10 years. So the conversation that I'm having right now, I think this is impact for me.
Definitely.
Because, I am getting to know that I got to know Disha in her formative years where she was learning some of these things, and now she's creating and making these moves in this larger space. So this is impact, So you see some of these things, but only years later. So you need to have resilience. And there is, in fact, a lot of conversation right now for special mental health training and provisions within the social sector because it's like I said, it's care work, right? It takes a toll on you. Caregiving is hard. Caregiving means there are a lot of times where you have to put yourself aside and put something else above you. And boundaries can get difficult and to draw because, when you're drawing a boundary for something that's not so purpose driven, where someone's direct life is not impacted, you can draw it with less guilt, with ease for yourself. But when you're drawing boundaries in this sector, there's an opportunity cost that, okay, if I don't go this extra mile right now, even though I'm really burnt out, maybe someone will suffer. Someone's experience will not be complete or will not be represented, or there will be a negative outcome. So it's difficult. So there's a lot of mental health conversations happening around people who work in the social sector, in fact, to build perseverance, to build resilience. So how I think to sort of sum it up, how I would frame it is that the perseverance and resilience is what gets me through every day where I'm like, it's fine, I will see the fruits of my labor many years later. And take joy and the passion and ambition come in where I take joy in these victories that I'm having this conversation with you. And when I talk to people who've been part of programs that I've been a part of, or I talk to organizations that are doing incredible work, I feel really passionate. One thing that's really great about this sector is that it's very collaborative and very community centric. There is not so much, businessy competition that takes place because no single entity can make this level of change, right? All change needs to happen at a collaborative systems level. We're all working together, not against each other.
How do you think, if you have like an example or something, what is something that you've learned from your personal life that you could actually implement in one of these experiences in the social impact? Even like a lesson you learned in your personal life that has helped you through taking decisions or, just gaining confidence throughout the way of your journey.
I think there are so many instances, but maybe I'll tell you something more broad. All of my research also in the past, a lot of the research that I did throughout college and, after my master's and my graduate studies, a lot of that involved talking to people who were directly impacted by maybe a particular social issue. So one of these things that I did really early on in college was this ethnography, which basically means that you do your personal ethnography actually, which is that you use narrative and stories about your own experiences and you reflect on that as an analytical sort of framework. So I did a personal ethnography of what feminism looked like from my grandmother's generation to my mom's to mine. And it's really interesting exercise, but I think why I'm mentioning that right now is that a lot of my work that I did during my graduate studies also involved interacting with people who were directly harmed by a particular thing. So for example, people who were maybe drug users or sex workers or formerly incarcerated people. Or women who've been abused, or people who are queer who've been marginalized in really systematic ways. And I think one of the things that I really truly believe is that solutions to some of these problems are community driven, and these solutions really lie with the people who directly are being harmed by it, because it's in their best interest, right, to come up with some of these solutions. But my larger point is that when I did this ethnography, when I reflected on my own personal experiences and I reflected on my family's personal experiences and experiences of all of these people who are directly going through harm, I think one thing that I have really learned in my interpersonal experiences with people is that people are willing to change, people are willing to solve issues, people are willing to take accountability, and solutions to some of these larger issues are with the communities that are facing that. We need to work towards creating systems that make those solutions heard. We need to work towards the root cause. That's what radical really means. Radical means grasping at the roots of something, because if you keep addressing the symptom and not the cause, you are only going to go so far, and the problem will keep reproducing. Right? And I think these root cause solutions lie with communities, lie with people. And that's where I think our personal experiences, our lived experiences, or anything that does to center our work around lived experiences of people who need these solutions the most, is what we should be doing. So, in philanthropy, for example, where I'm working now, there's a lot of conversation around trust-based philanthropy. That you go into the community, you talk to people, you go on these learning journeys where you see really the crux of the problem. Like recently, I actually went on a field visit in this place in Maharashtra with this NPO that's working towards maternal and child prenatal care, and I saw a lot of work that was happening there by community of volunteers. I met this volunteer towards the end of my field visit, where I saw a lot of these women who had benefited from going through this really rigorous community support, where they overcame addiction. They overcame, their children being very, very undernourished because of these communities' health programs that this NGO was running. And they're able to do that because they're an NGO. They're not, some big corporation. An NGO, they have scarce funds. So they work with people in the community. They have volunteers in the community. So I met this woman, she may be around maybe 50, 52. She has 4 children, and she is this brilliant, passionate person who really wanted to, I asked her very pointedly, I was like, आप क्यों करते हो ऐसे? आपको क्या मिल रहा है? Because she's not getting any money. True. She's taking out time actively in her day, and you have to recognize that time is money for a lot of people in these communities. When you take the opportunity cost to not earn a livelihood and do some community volunteer support, then you're actively foregoing livelihood options. So it's a big high stakes choice. It's not a choice you're making because you have a safety net. That's true. Right? So this woman, she's living, it's in this part of Mumbai, it's sort of a slum community. So it's a very, there's open defecation, open toilets. So this NGO is also working on, having water and sanitation accessible there, because it impacts directly mothers and young children. So this woman just talked about how she's like, if we don't help each other, if I don't help my neighbor, how will we all live? This life is not a game of scarcity where everybody has to catch on to what they can get. That's how systems are. And that's how systems are designed and incentivized. But people at their really fundamental in these communities want to help other people.
Very interesting. I think that's what when we get to talk about, how marginalized communities themselves, like all they need is just representation, because end of the day, they will know what best works for them. They might have a lot of these things, as you said, laid out already. The only thing they need is support from us, which is very interesting. So, when we talk about representation, like research is a very important aspect of it.
Yeah.
And, what are some things that you would want to talk about, maybe research that work related to research that you've done, maybe even incorporating some of these special lenses that you do in research.
Yeah. So one really interesting project that I did in my masters when I was in Canada was this guide that we worked on called the Gender Plus Guide to Research. Really interesting process. I'll get into the process later, but overall what the guide does is that it's an open access guide. Anyone can access it. Any researcher anywhere in the world can access it. The idea is, how do you incorporate a lens of intersectionality? And by that I mean, how do you, the thing that I was saying earlier about your identities being salient in different things, right? We're not one singular human being. I'm not just a woman. I'm multiple things. But what identity becomes salient when our experiences are always an intersectional experience where multiple cultural, economic, gender, political, spiritual, in terms of our ability, disability, what are those different identities that make us who we are, and how can we not think of them as 1 plus 1 as additive things, that I'm a woman plus I'm this, but as complex, like, interweb of things that become salient at different points. It's not that there's a hierarchy or it's a list of one thing or the other. And it would be absurd to ask someone that, okay, hey, can you, if I go into the field and I ask someone, can you tell me your experience of just being a woman? Leave out being a rural woman, leave out being maybe Dalit, but just a woman. Can someone really articulate that? No, right? Because your experience of womanhood is filled with instances of you being a woman, or you being a woman in a rural area. Or if someone asked me what my experience is of just being a woman without looking at my economic background or looking at my background in terms of what I believe in religion or a lot of these things, right? Political background. I would not be able to articulate my experience of womanhood outside of these categories because they all intersect. Right? So that's what I meant. So the idea was that when we do research, especially when we do research across different fields, but research that concerns human beings, and that doesn't mean just social science research. I want to say that it means scientific research also. You have to be cognizant that there is a power dynamic that exists when you go and do research, right? And how do you engage with that power? So this guide essentially is structured as a sort of a question guide, which is asking reflective questions at different stages of your research process. Because research process doesn't look the same for everyone, right? If you're in maybe the field that I was in, research is a lot more qualitative, it's more secondary, so you're not going into the field as much, in philosophy specifically. But, there are researchers who go on the field and they interact with people. So for example, if you're researching public health, you go and talk to communities, right? So how do you, one is just the ethics and basic consent of, participation and engaging. But much more robust than that, looking at who are you as a researcher? Where are you researching? What does it mean when you go and interact and do research? What does it mean when you read certain things that are written by people where, who are these people that you're reading? Why is it that you're reading these people? Asking these very specific pointed questions at different stages of your research is what really helps you arrive at a research design that is equal in its process and then equal in its outcome, right? Outcome can't be equality if your process itself has a lot of power dynamics that you haven't engaged with. And this is not to say that there will be research that exists without power. That's not true, right? There will always be power. And it's always going to be messy and you may get many things wrong in terms of how you're engaging. But that's okay, as long as you're being reflective about these. So just to give you an example of what all of this means, there was a research study that we were looking at when we were doing this guide, which looked at water consumption in this rural area in Canada. And how, what are patterns of water usage, accessibility, to understand how is it that water is being used as a
Okay.
resource in these communities.
Interesting.
And as a part of the research design, the field workers of that research and the researchers went onto the field and spoke to communities, right?
Yeah.
But what happened when they spoke to communities is that because these communities were gendered, they ended up speaking to men. Who are typically heads of households, right? And when there's an external person coming in, it's usually men who will go forward because women don't get that kind of access in terms of participation. In many communities across the board. So you don't even have to, don't worry about where this research is from and all of that, but just this happens everywhere. And so what they missed out in a lot of their research outcome was a lot of key analysis, because even though men were the one who participated in the research, women were the one who were really rationing out their water usage.
Right.
And they were the one who were really on an everyday basis dealing with how to resource and use and ration water. And so these researchers and this research really missed out on the actual patterns of water usage and how it can be channeled into a more sustainable way, because they didn't get to speak to the people who deal with it.
Right.
Because of how our society is structured.
We also often talk about, empowering women in a lot of different capacities, different areas.
Yeah.
But I also personally feel that one aspect that we often ignore is the amount of support systems and support networks that's required for women. And one really integral part of that is mentorship and role models that we have. So, how important would you say it is to have a relatable role model when you actually look up to someone in any industry that you are in?
Yeah. It's very important. I think I would say, I think for me, I don't view it so much as a singular role model. And this question, even when I was a kid, always baffled me. I was like, wow, who is my role model? One person. And I would have different role models at different times, depending on what was interesting to me as a child. But as I have grown and as I have grown up in this space, in this sector, in working for these things, I think it's more about the kind of community you build with, especially community that I build with women, with me. And one of the perks of working in the social sector, like what I talked about earlier, also one of the challenges that there's an overrepresentation of women in some of these caregiving professions. And also in the social sector. But that means that I've had the privilege of having teams of just women, which I have to say are a personal delight. Because, we all are raised with so much conditioning. We all come from such diverse backgrounds and diverse conditioning. But the gendered experience that women have access to, for example, that makes it much easier for us to understand each other, to be empathetic towards each other, to really understand. Like I'm sure everyone experiences this when you talk to your fellow colleague or your friend who's a woman, and you sort of describe a gendered experience at work that maybe I was talked over in a meeting, which happens. All the time, all the time. I'm saying something and another man just thinks that it's not relevant to listen, this happens all the time. There would be an immediate, I'm sure you relate to it, even though we're 10 years apart. I'm sure in the classroom there must be men and boys who interrupt you constantly, right? Because we just devalue women's voices. So there are certain experiences that we have access to as women that men don't, because they don't have a lived experience. But they might hear from their friends or from their families and communities that they live in, but they don't personally experience it. And so there's a very intrinsic understanding that we develop amongst each other, right? So because I've had the privilege of working with women, my work I think that network of women has really been my core mentorship support, communities and communities of women that we have. And there's actually evidence and research that building communities for women where they can talk about their own diverse, unique, lived experiences of gender helps women thrive, especially in workplaces. There are now networking platforms that are designed just for women to give advice to each other. Because, for example, women in leadership positions, firstly, there are very few. So they have very few counterparts, for example, within their own company that they can talk to about these experiences they might be facing. If you are an associate at a company that you're starting and your boss is, behaving inappropriately with you, sometimes there's a power dynamic that you can't interact with. But there are communities where you can talk about this and they can tell you what are things that you have that keep you in the focus. You know,
Right.
what are survivor-centric approaches you can
Right.
take, and
Mhm.
that sort of community knowledge we all have, right? Girls check in with each other that, hey, drop me a text when you get home.
Yeah.
Things like, we have these little rituals that we do
Mhm.
to make sure that we're all safe
Right.
and we're all healthy and we're comfortable. So, in fact, I was recently interacting with this NPO that works with women, girls specifically, who are 12 pass in really remote parts of Himachal. They're called Sajay Sapne. You should really check them. They do
Okay.
incredible work. Big shout out to them. But I was recently having a conversation with their founder to understand their work better. And we were just looking at, impact, what has happened after these girls have, so they run this center where they help girls who are 12 pass get career opportunities in really
Wow.
remote villages. And what usually happens in remote villages is that after 12, you have virtually very few options to have a career.
Right.
You may learn tailoring. You may learn things that help your livelihood while you stay there.
Right.
Not a career, right? So she has built this center to say that these girls should have career opportunities. She calls them Sapne Wali, which I absolutely love, And so I was talking to her and she was telling me that after they all graduate, they're on this alumni WhatsApp group. Someone will, and these are women who live in really remote parts that that I actually tried to look for on Google Maps and I couldn't find a route there. So you can imagine how remote these parts are. They've never seen the inside of a formal workplace. Are earning 15,000 and some of them have had to migrate as well for some of these jobs. Some of them are more work from home, use a formal workplace that they are part of now, and they train them in fact in STEM.
Wow.
Because these are things that sort of help with their career, right? So they on the group, they'll be like, आज मेरे बॉस ने बहुत जोर से चिल्ला दिया, मैं क्या करूँ? मन नहीं कर रहा काम करने का. Then other women are like, no problem, this happens, you can power through. They're collectively helping build resilience. And these specific experiences in these community spaces are so important. And these are not new. This has been from years. Women have confided in other women for anything that they feel like are challenges that they're facing, because they know that there is an intrinsic understanding that will come from these communities where they have this kind of unique similarity. Or even if there are not a lot of similarities, it's just that women do support women. And, this community network and this kind of mentorship, literally every time I've had to make career switches or decide, big things in my life, I have talked to women in my life.
It really is. I think also when we talk about competition in itself, like when you have these support networks, you don't have to necessarily view your win as someone else's loss, which is a very common thing in other industries and co-ed workplaces, etc. And it really becomes like, a win for the whole community when even one person, even in the same industry as well, as kind of achieved something. And you genuinely feel from the heart for that person.
Absolutely.
So always beautiful.
And there is no dearth of wins. Everyone can win.
Exactly.
We all win. It's not a scarcity mentality. You can have a mentality of abundance. There is enough for all. We just need to systematize it in a way that everybody gets equitably. But yeah, absolutely.
This has been like a very, very interesting, enriching discussion. I think a lot of the people that are watching might, want to go into some of these areas, especially now that, you've talked so much about them. But like whether it's social impact or research, what would be like a piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to go into something similar?
Absolutely. We need more people. Please join. Is the one thing that I would say. But there is so much advice. I feel like this whole episode I've just given advice to everybody. But I think the one, maybe two things that I would say that have helped me go a really long way. One that I talked about earlier, I think, is humility. And by that I mean intellectual humility. And why I say that is because I come from a lot of privilege of having access to education in private universities in India, private universities in Canada. So you can imagine the kind of access that I've had in education and exposure that I've had, right? And things I've read, and that can create a sense of, oh, I know everything. I've read all books and all research papers, so I know everything. And that, I think, is not always the best approach, especially in this sector. Of course, you should be confident in the things you know. And I'm not saying you should not have conviction on the things that you know and belief in the things that you know. But you have to balance it with this humility that maybe I don't know. Or maybe things have changed.
Right.
Or maybe and especially, like I said, like this ethic of humility, when you go into, a lot of times when I work in this sector, I'm working for people who don't have even 1/4 the privilege that I have had and grown up with. And I'm working for them, in service of them, in collaboration with them, not even with that service mentality, but also in collaborate, like how do we have power how do we have power together, right? As opposed to power over, or you having power over me, not that replicating, reversing the power dynamic is not what we want. We want to create power together. And so I think the one thing that I will say is that humility that maybe you don't know, or that, experiences are so diverse and people are motivated by so many different things, and all kinds of things when people exist. I think that if you tap into that and you observe the way things work, I think your understanding, your standpoint of the realities that we live in can only get better. And I think that standpoint, it's not that because I'm a woman and because I don't come from a Dalit background, I can never understand. I mean, of course, I can never personally experience them, but I can be in solidarity with them. We only build movements and solutions when we are in solidarity, when we're in alliance. So for me to build that solidarity, I have to have humility that I don't know what they're going through, but I can try to understand. And developing that standpoint that doesn't come to you through personal experience can only come with that kind of humility. So I think that humility, especially in this sector, is really important. Be open-minded, be curious. Just be curious. Why do you feel this way? Why do you think this way? Even if someone disagrees with you, on an everyday basis, when I sometimes travel in cabs and, talk to some of my cab drivers who don't think ideologically similar to me. Like, for example, when I was telling you about this field visit I went to, the cab driver that dropped me there, he was very surprised why I was there. He's like, Madam, aap yahan kya kar rahe ho is jagah pe, and I was like, I'm here for some sort of work. So he's like, yeah, aap social work walo ke paas aur koi kaam nahi hai, aap bar yahan aake, these people don't need help. They just need to, he had his own views, which were different from mine, of course. But I didn't shun that view. And I think sometimes when we're very passionate, we tend to miss out on some of these things, which is why I said balancing that passion with resilience and perseverance, humility is important. I just asked him questions. I was like, aapko aisa kyun lagta hai? Aapke saath kuch hua jo aapko aisa lagta hai? Like, why do you think this? What happened with you that you feel this way about? Because for you to feel so passionately about something must have happened. And understanding that is really crucial, because now I know that there are people who feel this way. They will resist certain things. They will have a buy-in with certain things, right? So that humility is really important. And I think the other thing that I will say is that I used to say to when I was, teaching the cohorts that I was teaching when Disha was a part of my cohort also, is that whatever kind of skill set you have, we need it. You don't have to be a change maker in one sense. You don't have to be, like there are multiple ways to make a change. And in fact, there is a story of change video on YouTube about this. Whether you are a negotiator, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're an artist, you're a communicator, you're someone who likes to be on the streets, whether you're a thinker, you're a nurturer. Every kind of skill set, personality, interest, disposition you have can be channeled into doing good in the world. So don't hold back because you're like, oh, this kind of person can make change and this kind of person can't. That's not the case. Whatever kind of skill set you have, it can be used. So don't be afraid. If you're an artist and you want to work for social change, you can. If you are really analytical and you want to work into analyzing social problems, you can. Like, you don't have to be one kind of way to do that. So I think this humility and really leveraging what you already know and what you have and what you want to develop to do good is, I think, the two things that I will say is what you should focus on. And keep being resilient, keep trying.
This has been an amazing discussion. Thank you so much for being here today. I mean, one thing that I've also learned from, you has been definitely that looking at diversity shouldn't just be from like a very superficial level. Like, when you delve into the things that people bring to the table and not just ask them, directly or try to assume things. When you ask more questions, then make more assumptions is when you actually get to know a lot of things.
Exactly. So well said.
So definitely, I'm still awestruck about the so many things I've learned today about research and like I'm sure I'll be sure to implement a lot of them in my personal
Yeah.
life as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. It has been a pleasure. And like I was really nervous before this, but it really felt like a really candid conversation. I hope that it has some value to all of the audience members. So thank you so much. For
No
having me.
problem, no problem. I mean, your dedication to give all of us positive insights,
Yeah.
it does overlap with so many of SheSight's ideas as well.
Yeah.
And now that we have like another episode up in the series, we hope that you guys will, also read the feature story. We'll have a similar version of that available on the magazine. And, it's really been commendable, like, stories of her, for her. I think it perfectly fits into that whole category.
Yeah.
So really, we hope you guys check some more episodes out and check the story out as well. Thank you, Disha.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who is watching.